another episode of the ADHDads. I'm your host, CJ.
I'm JJ.
And today I'm excited to be bringing this episode to you guys because I developed an exercise for you to take home to your partner, your wife, your loved one, your girlfriend, and, establish some rules for fighting, right? Doesn't that sound fun? Doesn't that sound like a fun conversation and fun date night? No, but seriously, guys, I think that too often in relationships, we don't have this conversation, right? When things are cool, calm, and collected, we don't establish these boundaries and these rules and these guidelines for how to proceed when emotions are flying off the handle, right? Or we're just really passionate in it. Oftentimes we just we get into it and we have no game plan, and then we often make a mess of things. And I'm speaking from experience here myself. This exercise that I created comes from a lot of not only research, but a lot of personal experiences and failures and messes that I've made myself, So these are just some kind of observations and experiences and gatherings from my own life journey here that I thought were very helpful in my own self-growth and that I wanted to share with you guys. So yeah, man, JJ, how you feeling today? What's going on in your world?
The last time we chatted, we talked about something kind of that will be, directly related to this, right? As rules and boundaries, and what does that look like, and how does that create or break a relationship? How does it make it grow or make it, wither and die? So I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of dive further deep into what does it look like on a day-to-day basis, having exercise with your partner. And one of the things in terms of, like you said, rules of engagement, how to fight, we're not saying like, you're going to learn how to punch your partner in the face with compliments, killing with kindness or something. We're not looking for that. We're not throwing fists from our mouth in this. We're looking for the way to get to peaceful resolve, which is what I think everybody would hope for and strive for in their relationship, right? Is I disagree, but that doesn't mean I dispute you and I want to argue against you. It's more just like, let's come together. Let's get a better understanding, right? I love the idea of maybe it's not even disagreement. It's just different perspective, and I'm trying to understand you. So I just want to, point out that I think that that's a beautiful thing to kind of, offer up as a tool to help people get there. Because man, there's just so many ways we can fall apart in the moment. Let's say somebody just walks by us and looks at us looks at us as what we perceive the wrong way. And next thing you know, like, what? We've got this, you're putting them on the defense immediately because you're feeling defensive over the way they looked at you. And they might have just had something in their eye, for God's sake. And next thing you know, they're like, well, the way you talked about me in front of your mother is a whole other thing. I saw the way you looked at me. So we don't want to get there, right?
That's the interesting thing, right? Is like we all bring to the table different unique life experiences, different past traumas and relationships with our family and our parents, and those things will differ from person to person and relationship to relationship. And that's why I think it's really important to have these discussions and to be really curious about each other's experiences, because they are so different, and these rules are going to change, for couple to couple and person to person. What I'm giving here is more of a guideline or an exercise to establish your own rules in your own relationship, because I think that that's really the important thing there. I don't think that there is a set of rules or a how-to or a list of things for every relationship to succeed by, right? Like everybody has different needs, and like I said, bring different experiences and pasts to this. So, how can we explore that, and what kind of tools and techniques can we use in communication to understand not only ourselves better, but our partners better, so that we can avoid these high intense moments.
Yeah, buddy. Well, I would just like for you to get going on this. Let's tell us a little bit about your passion project for helping other people kind of develop a way to healthy communication with their partners.
Well, before we do get too deep into this, I think that we should kind of, talk about the difference between boundaries and rules. And we
Okay.
kind of like touched on this, in a previous episode here. But, I want to kind of go back to that and touch on some of the points that we brought up, and from what I gathered, and where those key moments is that boundaries more define the limits of one's personal space. They're guidelines that indicate what's acceptable and comfortable for us as the individual within a relationship. And they're related to our personal values, our emotions, our physical space, and our individual needs. And they differ from person to person. And maybe your partner doesn't have the same boundaries as you, but your boundary could be, personal space, or maybe privacy, emotional boundaries, and even, limits on certain behaviors. Where rules, on the other hand, I think are more specific guidelines or expectations that both parties within the relationship agree to. So,
Mm.
rules are typically focused on regulating specific behaviors or actions in the relationship, but they're agreed upon by both parties. You infidelity, or finances or abuse topics, those kind of things. They provide a structure to kind of help establish both of our shared experiences into an agreement that we, both are agreeing upon. They're mutually agreed upon, and they exist to kind of create a framework for the relationship to function smoothly. you know um, so in short, boundaries are individual limits and personal guidelines, where rules are mutually agreed upon limits on behaviors or actions within the relationships.
So I'll ask a question then, and I'm not assuming that you have the all the answers to these questions I might throw at you, but I really just I'm curious for myself too, and I'm sure other people are as well. Do you believe that part of the problem is that simply we don't really know the definition of a boundary in our relationships, so we assume that it's something that everybody needs to apply to themselves. Everybody needs to have the exact same boundary, and just like the idea of sports, you hit the ball out of bounds, regardless of who you are. Now there's a penalty, or there's a turnover, or whatever it looks like. And then when we talk about boundaries for ourselves, that's an individual experience. Do you believe that that's kind of somewhere where people get tripped up, and the next thing you know, they're in the battle mode because they can't just simply agree about what's safe and what's unsafe for each individual person in that moment. Now they're actually collectively trying to tackle this idea of boundary.
Totally. I think that we really place expectations on other people's boundaries. We think we put kind of like a general sense on boundaries, and just because there are personal boundaries doesn't mean that they, resonate with somebody else's personal boundaries. And I think that what you're talking
Mm,
about in the sports analogy there, I think the important distinction is that before everybody goes into that game, they've established what the boundaries are. Everybody
yeah.
knows what it is, and that's the miss that I think that a lot of couples and relationships make, is that we aren't communicating about what those personal boundaries may be, and how that
Yeah.
may bleed over into these shared boundaries, or these agreed upon maybe rules or guidelines that we can agree upon, and then we can kind of work from, well, I don't agree with your personal boundary there, it's not one for me, but let's talk about that and how it makes
Yeah.
you feel or makes me feel, or
Mm,
why that's in place for you, or what insecurities or trauma or past experiences that may stem from. And is that a
yeah.
healthy boundary, or is that one that is a personal trauma?
Yeah. So if I were to enter into a relationship, I am not simply going to know this person top to bottom, left to right. I'm going to learn things along the way. We're not applying for a job with a resume, where somebody can look us over and do an interview and then engage in us, in a romantic way. We learn as we go. So is it is it something that's realistic and fair for the other person if we say, hey, this happened, you've now shared with me your boundary, does that person have a right to discuss that? Or are we saying, if does it is it safe for either partner to say, here's my boundary, if you don't abide by this boundary, then we have a problem? Is that okay, or is that stepping over the line now because I'm applying a boundary to somebody and I'm using it as a method to get what I want in the relationship at most likely somebody else's expense or the other person's expense?
Yeah. I hope we got that, because your audio is kind of
Oh,
choppy and getting robotic, and I lost video feed on you. So I hope that that the listeners understood that question as good as I did. um, but
it's good from my end, but we'll get it in the post production.
okay. Well, I think that there are healthy consequences to overstepping boundaries, versus unhealthy ones, and I want to get into that, because I think it is an important distinction, where I think an unhealthy consequence to someone violating your personal boundary would be more like manipulation or vengeance or volatile expressions of behavior, name calling, insults, anything that really kind of withholds further communication or a resolution, or something that has either shame or guilt to it, or blame. I think that those are unhealthy methods of addressing someone crossing your boundary, where a more healthy way would be, um, being more curious as to, again, why those boundaries were crossed, what why reasons were there to evoke that kind of behavior, and to maybe reestablish firmer boundaries and talk about what that looks like, and revisiting and reaffirming some of those previous discussions,
Mm.
in a more curious way, rather than, like I said, a more blame or guilt or volatile way.
So we're creating a well, I don't want to compare it too much to politics, but we're creating with somebody a constitution of relationship, and we have the right to make amendments along the way to better serve the relationship and each other.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important part of this process too, is that revisiting this exercise and this conversation within your relationship, because we are not perfect creatures, right? Like, we're gonna mess up, we're gonna fall into old habits, we're gonna misspeak, misunderstand, speak at volumes that maybe we don't intend to, or maybe break some of these rules that we're establishing, um,
Mm.
because it takes practice, and it takes patience and grace, and a little bit of empathy, to go through this process. So, that's part of this exercise. So, let's get into
Perfect.
it. I just want
Yeah,
to like
buddy.
start with like the first thing that I want to people to consider as they go on this, and that's the generative
Mm.
inquiry, right? So we have to begin by having open and honest conversations about how we're both feeling, about how arguments make us feel, about certain triggers that the other person does. And this requires some really active listening, right? Like,
Mm.
and loving curiosity. Like, you can't just, it's human nature that when you hear, you know, this behavior makes me feel this way, you want to get defensive, you want to self-preserve, you want to defend the ego,
Mm.
you know
Mm.
so I think that, like, during this first step, and when you're having these generative inquiry conversations, and you're really trying to practice active listening, you really need to get familiar with using I statements, rather than, again, using statements that blame or attack the other person, or generative statements, you always, you are, you know an
Mm.
I statement would be something like, I feel hurt when this sort of behavior happens, or I feel frustrated when you arrive late.
Mm,
I statements express the emotions of you without attacking the other person.
mm. I wonder if when we start to use the always, something is never always.
Yeah.
When we're using absolutes, I
Yeah.
wonder if there's a way for us to identify that in ourselves, because essentially, well, let's say you're bringing up past trauma in this exchange, identifying the fact that you are triggering yourself at that point because you're bringing something from the past to the surface. That's you pulling out a trigger from yourself, even though it could be the body language or the fighting stance of your partner, kind of bringing that stuff to the surface. I wonder if that's something that's we can find a way to identify that trigger in the moment. Say, oh my gosh,
Mm.
I just did it again, where I said, "You always this," because
Yeah.
people don't always.
For me, JJ, I was really victim of this a lot. I'm someone
Mm.
that likes language, and I like being passionate about words. And so sometimes I can maybe embellish on a story a little too much. I don't want to say exaggerate. My wife may argue with you that it's a complete exaggeration, but I would like to say a colorful embellishment. As I'm pointing this out as I'm talking right now, but I like to sometimes I use those general statements and those infinite statements, those permanent
Mm.
statements. You're always late. You're never on time. You always make me feel that you always do this, just to like drive a point home,
Mm.
and again, it can be misinterpreted and as to like you're not only attacking a behavior in the moment, but you're attacking this person for who they are,
Mm.
and that can have a lot more weight to it, so though I'm just trying to drive my point home and that's not my intent, I think it's really important that we are intentional with the words that we choose to use,
Mm.
and that just something, just a simple switch from away from general statements or permanent statements like this can really just kind of give you a second to pause and change your tonality and give information in a way that's not incriminating. It's just about asking more questions and being curious,
Yeah.
rather than it is about self-defense or self-preservation.
And you kind of had that combination example just now. You said, you're always late, or you're never this. So you're taking the I statement and throwing it out the window, and you're putting, a statement out there of accusation and incriminating, as you mentioned, to the other person. So then, therefore, in our defensive mode, we're trying to put the other person on defense as well. So we're just creating an opportunity to continue furthering that, that kicking of the can down the road in this argument. We're not actually picking it up and throw it in the recycling. We're just unfortunately we're just keeping the problem going.
Mm. Yeah, and how we do that, I think, is active listening, and I think that that's something that you guys should discuss in a relationship too. Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes we take that for granted, right? And you think, well, I'm listening to you. I'm sitting here. I'm twiddling my thumbs. I'm rolling my eyes. I'm not looking at you, and I'm, tapping my fingers, but I'm listening to you.
Yeah,
Even if I'm not
yeah.
interrupting you. And I think that it's just too often we're biting our tongue just long enough to just formulate our thoughts and opinions to object to our partner's experience, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, we're not really listening. We're just running through with what we want to respond with. It's this selfish pursuit that we misinformation, we glaze over stuff, we misinterpret facts, and we don't get the full picture because we just want to speak or we're caught up in our own internal dialogue of how we want this conversation to go or how we're going to justify our actions.
Mm.
So I think it's really important to talk about what active listening looks like. Body language and positioning can go a long way. Are you guys facing each other? Are you standing, nose to nose, toes to toes? Are you guys sitting, side by side? Are you going for a walk? If you guys' love language is physical touch, like, can you guys develop some sort of connection between the two of you to let you guys know that you are listening, and that you are engaged? That's something that my wife and I try to do is at least have a hand on a knee, or we're holding hands. We try to engage in that physical touch throughout the whole conversation, because it keeps you from storming up and getting off the couch and start pacing around, and it helps ground you. It helps just connect you to that person and the proximity of space, and in feeling that person's skin on yours. So I get in touch with what that looks like, and in what that love language and how it expresses itself in those moments.
Mm. I kind of wonder. I think you're also pointing to something through the idea of active listening and those rules and establishing rules, not right when an argument starts, but before an argument is even remotely on each other's radar.
Yeah.
Is reflection, right? Is active listening is reflection, and that seems to some, when they immediately think about that, the reflection's an impossibility in the moment of argument. But that's probably because we are not allowing for the space to let those thoughts and feelings really work themselves into our own thoughts and feelings. And we're creating a story on the fly, which is out of defense, and we're in that amygdala point of fight or flight. So if we have the opportunity to say, hey, each time somebody is, this is me just speaking off the cuff, by the way, when we get into a moment of tension, our active listening effort would be a point of reflection. And it's not stonewalling, it's breathing. It's allowing for the words that you've spoken to me to be respected, to be honored, and to be processed. So then I can bring to you my best self in response. How do we do that? Because I think active listening, as you've been pointing out here, is something that is absolutely vital. And man, I'm telling you, people seem to think that their ears got cut off and their mouth grew 10 times bigger when they're in those moments.
Yeah, that's why I think that having this discussion beforehand is really important. Like, don't do this exercise when you guys are like in the middle of a fight. Don't like break this piece of paper out like while your wife is yelling at you about the dishes and be like, well, I want to get into this now. Or
like what we said, when you do that in the moment, there's, in our last discussion, it's an opportunity to weaponize at that point, right? Because now you're like, oh, I see this and you're not doing that, right? So I'm sorry, I wanted to just jump in there because I think you made a valid point on our previous conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think, again, doing this in a time of calm, maybe when things are going good with you guys are in a really good place. You're in a good week, maybe just derail it with what pisses you off about our fight conversation. No, I think that this really can create some wonderful intimacy, though, JJ, if both parties are curious and open to this. Intimacy is not just a physical level, but an emotional, intellectual thing. And if you guys can create a safe space for one another to express some of these things, I'm telling you, it gets the blood going, in more ways than one, So having these conversations in a time of calm really sets you up for when things aren't calm. You can refer back to this, you can reference this, and that's kind of the third step in this exercise. JJ is talking about respect. What does respect look like to you? And I think that you guys have to set time apart for what a disrespect in an argument may look like. And you guys have to develop rules around kindness. Even when the disagreements arise, respect is still important and you should discuss it and agree upon it, not personally attacking or yelling, but instead focusing on the issues at hand and, what do those rules of respect look like? Some people may not like to be yelled at, or thrown things at, or hit, obviously. But sometimes, my wife and I have a rule where we try not to bring up past indiscretions. Again, that's kind of staying away from those permanent and those generalization tools. Well, you always do this, or well, you did this before, so now and I didn't say anything then, so now I'm saying it now because you did it again, and now I'm going to do it even louder and with more passion and resentment because I didn't bring it up last time. What happened in the past, and if you guys didn't address it, it holds no weight into this conversation here and what we're talking about. And we agree upon those boundaries of respect, right? And they may be a boundary for one of us, but not the other one, but we have to kind of find out what that compromise looks like, of respect, because, I don't like being yelled at, JJ, but sometimes my wife, when I say I don't like the way the tone or the volume that you're using during an argument, she say, well, I'm human, and sometimes I just get angry and I want to yell, and I can understand that too. And though we're trying to maybe work towards a lower volume or a different way of doing it, I also have to be able to understand that though she may be pushing against my threshold or limit, I can also see that she's at hers,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have to find some sort of compromise, whether that be a pause or a break or, a safe word, which we'll get into in a minute here, but just whatever that compromise may look like, so that we are always in respect to each other's boundaries. So
Yeah.
talking about what those feelings look like, those triggers and those reactions to those behaviors look like, can maybe help us understand a little bit better. Maybe even if we can't find a compromise, we can at least maybe have some empathy and grace for when we see that behavior in the other person, that to remember this isn't a personal attack. It's maybe just the threshold of their boundary or their limit on their emotional capacity. And it's not an impersonal attack, which I would want to take it as if we didn't have this conversation right now.
Well, so when somebody says to you in a point of heated argument, I'm feeling this, and well, I'm yelling because I am passionate, or whatever the words are that we use to defend why we are escalated. How do you how do you address that in a way that's not going to make them go, oh, well, turns out I can go to 11 in this moment because of what you said in response to my defending myself. So an example is like, well, I'm yelling because of, XYZ. And we respond with, well, is it kind or helpful to yell in this moment? If we're sitting in a therapist's office and one starts to yell and the therapist says that to them, I think we'd have a different reaction because the therapist is a neutral party. But when we're in this exchange and we know we're in this exchange together, we've created this exchange and now we're heated again, pitted against each other in some way. How do we break through that, cut through that, tension and that anger or whatever emotion is escalated at that time?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we are going to cross those thresholds sometimes, right? Like, we often don't think like, oh, I'm being triggered. I'm about to be triggered. It's often you get triggered and then you make a mess of things and scream and wave your arms all over the place. And then you calm down and then you go, yeah, that was triggering. Fuck, And I think that those are going to happen because we are human and we do make mistakes and we're not going to be perfect at this. So the next step of that exercise is, developing a game plan when respect is crossed, when boundaries are crossed, and maybe that looks like a safe word. Maybe it looks like pressing pause, or some sort of signal, whatever that is. You guys have to agree that when you hear that word, you see that signal, you got to press pause. And I don't mean pause for an indefinite amount of time. I don't mean walk away and withhold or withdraw or give the cold shoulder, because I think, again, that's another kind of toxic form of consequential punishment for when someone crosses your boundary, But I do agree with maybe pausing, calming down, cooling down, self-reflecting, thinking of a better way to articulate your thoughts better. We've talked about in past relationships, sometimes when my wife and I get to this point, we'll go in other rooms and write in a journal. And then we'll come back like, in the principal's office and be like, I was upset because you did this and it made me feel this way. But at least we've thought it out longer and we've been able to write it and really articulate it in a way without just flying off the cuff of emotional reaction. So I think that those just moments of pause and reflection should be agreed upon and celebrated and practiced regularly. When things maybe go overboard or get out of hand in an argument, because that's how you're gonna think more clearly and get all of the facts and be able to practice that active listening once again that we were talking about earlier.
So I wanna pause in that moment, which I know is a little bit of a pun to what we're talking about, but kind of build on that and just kind of give my own thoughts to our listeners on that. I think one thing that people can tend to do to weaponize those things that they learn about the pause and about the breathing is in the moment they, in a heated way, say, well, you need to reset right now, or you need to walk away.
Yeah.
Which is a push, which is a shove, which is an attempt to control. It's violence in words. It's destructive. So when we find ourselves triggered and the other person's most likely triggered and heated in that moment, what we do to express our boundary in that moment for ourselves, to be really suggesting the idea of emotional intelligence, is to say, hey, I need a reset for myself here. I need to walk away from this for a moment. Okay, even with our kids, we can do that. I had that moment last week where I mentioned the baseball thing. I brought my son inside and I told him, I said, you can tell by my body language and my voice right now that I'm frustrated and I'm upset. And I wanted to get us removed from that situation because I know I wasn't showing up best for you in that moment, and you weren't showing up best for yourself either. So I know that I wasn't in a good place to keep that conversation or argument going in that moment. So I removed us from that, and I obviously need to remove myself from this at some point because I still am not handling this well. So like you said, I statements, reflection, an opportunity to express how you're doing and how you need to work on that boundary for yourself. I didn't do it in the most perfect, healthy way because, well, like a normal human being, I lost the skills to manage that situation. One of the skills I lost in that moment was the power of redirection. At this point, I was just pulling away, extracting us from the situation because I did not find myself able to handle those moments with skill and the tools to kind of bring us all back together to, peaceful resolve and moving on and having fun together. So that was a realization in the moment of myself saying, all right, well, I'm going to protect a certain amount of us here, but I still need to work on the next level of protection, which, like you said, maybe looks like journaling and coming back. And you almost sounded like a Muppet for some reason when you're doing that. Like, I feel this way. Wouldn't that be a cool way? Wouldn't that be a cool way to kind of come back? Like, okay, when we come back to our argument, or when we talk about what we did, we're gonna sound like Fozzie the Bear, like waka waka.
Well, that's one of my rules in my relationship. We have to put cartoon voices. We have to bring some sort of silly humor.
But I love the value of going away, and we're not going away, but like, that person was so shitty to me in this way, and I'm justified in this way, and this is my journal, and now I've got the proof to show just how crappy they were. Like, you're not doing that. You're doing the reflecting piece. You're doing that. This is kind. This is how the kindness returns. This is what I do.
And you're also still sticking to those I statements, right? Like,
yes.
The whole point of the journal is to take the time to articulate yourself. Because again, what we're doing with the verbal vomit of just reacting off of emotions isn't working, right? We're not articulating, we're making it worse, we're just getting deeper in it, and we're pissing each other off. So the whole point of the journal is to recenter yourself into how to restructure your thoughts.
Yeah.
to again put it into the I statements, using empathy, using curiosity rather than statements. When I do those journal statements, I try to ask more questions than, well, you did this. I'm not pointing out examples like you're saying. I'm thinking about what is the healthiest way to move forward from this point on, and how am I going to write that down rather than just getting the verbal. And if you need to go into the room and pace back and forth and mumble to yourself, which sometimes I do, like Yosemite Sam in the garage. Sometimes I feel like I need to get that out. We were talking the other
Yeah.
episode about how I needed to apologize for my 4-letter rant of curse words when you were talking about Cohen getting bullied, because I just got so worked up. And that feels like a healthy expression to me in the moment.
Mhm.
If I could just get all these, like, oh, I know that these words have this negative weight to them, and if I could just like purge my body of it, just say fuck as many times in the next 30 seconds, I'll feel better. And I never do, but in the moment it feels justified, and it feels right. But I don't want to do that. If I do it in front of my wife, oh boy, it makes it worse, but if I can go in the garage, get that out, and then sit down with a pen and paper and restructure those into, well, I feel like this when this behavior goes, it goes a lot further than when I step in it, man.
And man, I really appreciate that, because that's just an admittance to my human nature, which everybody has human nature. I listened to the Light podcast fairly recently. Michelle Obama was I don't remember which guest she had on, but of course, major high profile guest, because freaking Obama. And they asked her about the whole idea of when they go low, we go high. Do you always go high, or something like that? I think was the question to her, and she says, "Oh no, we go sit around the table and have a whole bunch of low taking place, and then we work through that, and then we present what it is that we really want to be in the world. We want to be this light. We want to bring positivity. We want to be an example of positivity in this difficult moment." And that's what I appreciate. Yes.
And see, I think that we don't give each other the grace to work through that until what the next positive thing is. Sometimes we get so judgmental in our opinions, and we watch other people's behaviors, and we don't realize that if we let them work through it and we're there to help them work through the lows, that they can often come to what the high is. But I think that sometimes we discredit people because we go, geez, they're not a good person, they want to take the low, right? Like, this is the high that I believe that they should take, and they're wanting to get the low. But if we had more curious conversations about that, and about why they want to take the low, and why we think the high may be a better, in a more curious way, rather than a shame, guilt, attacking way. I think that we can really find some beautiful compromise and some really great human experiences, and people might surprise you with the high that they can figure out at the end of working through the low. Because we all want to have that moment that I'm talking about in the garage where you're cussing like Yosemite Sam, right? Like, and sometimes if we don't get that, then you compile it and you compound it and you bury it in, and then it becomes a low that you can't see the high out of, because you haven't been able to work through it. You're just burying it. You're trying to run from it. You're trying to avoid it, and then it all of a sudden consumes. So we have to be able to work through it and give people the grace and time and patience to work through it themselves, because the next step of this process is compromise, JJ.
Yeah.
It is the shared mentality of what do we both want here, and it's not a lose sacrificial kind of mentality. It's a win-win. How can we celebrate each other's boundaries without sacrificing our own?
I want to circle back to something that you said kind of quickly through this, and I believe it's an important thing that every couple should maybe consider, that you and your wife practice. You mentioned that you don't bring in past infractions into the conversation. Like, well, a week ago you did this, and whatever it looks like, whatever that conversation argument would be. And I think that that's really important. And you want to know why I think that's so important is if we create a story in our heads and we're arguing against that person and they're not even present. I said arguing against too. That's an important part of this. We're building up a case against them, and we're gonna, the only protagonist in that conversation is ourselves. So we're gonna talk ourselves into, a whole, new level of escalation, which isn't healthy. And if we decide to bring that to somebody, what is that saying? That's saying I've indebted you for this however much time it's been since we've had that last exchange. I'm indebting you, and I need you to see that my argument then is still the right argument. You are in the wrong. I am in the right, and I know it because I've been beating you up in my head all over the place. I mean, that's putting them into a state of debt that they weren't even really aware of. I mean, in unhealthy relationships, maybe that at that point, everybody's expecting like, oh, they're just going over there bitching about me to themselves or to somebody else and stuff. But when you agree upon that rule in your marriage and say, this is not healthy for us to bring something back up and put you in a disadvantage immediately because I'm somebody who has the advantage and the understanding that you don't have, and you need to know that. Like, to me, that's placing resentment and debt on the other person. You're presenting your resentments, of course, and then you're putting them in a state of debt. And I just want to acknowledge that again. Like, I think that's a piece that you quickly talked about, and it needs to be further identified and praised as a great tool toward the path of healing in a relationship, and not just a path of healing, but a successful component of relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good point there about the kind of, the you're already coming in with a position of power by bringing something up like that. So not only is this person maybe feeling defensive, but now they're feeling twice the defensiveness because it's not only this time, but then the last time. Again, it really compounds into that. You didn't just make a bad choice. You are a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
It just like really can how just those general terms and those finite terms can really like put such a weight that we don't even realize on a conversation like that.
Yeah. What does it
And
say? What does I told you so say? I think it kind of in some way says, I don't know how to forgive. I'm a
yeah,
person who withholds forgiveness.
exactly. Yeah. And so, okay, so what do we do when we don't agree? Right, like, because you guys are two humans, right? And you're gonna
Mm,
bring different opinions to this conversation, and you guys maybe won't always be able to find some sort of compromise on that, but I think that we also again need to look at compromise differently. Like a lot of
oh,
times
brother, yes.
people look at compromise in these relationships as like, um okay, like when I talk to people about marriage, or you ask people what does marriage mean to them, a common answer that I hear is compromise. But
Mhm.
it's not in a positive way. It's like a compromise in like a sacrificial, I have to give something up, you have to just let things go, you have to choose your battles kind of mentality, right?
Part of
And
my
that's,
humanity is taken from me in this.
yes, and I that's wrong, man. That's the glass is half empty rather than half full kind of scenario here. And what
Right.
I try to look compromise as is a celebration of wins. It's a win-win dynamic. It's how do you still feel heard while I still feel heard, even if we can't meet, even if there's a fence in the middle of this, we can still play with each other, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that developing that and understanding that and celebrating the wins rather than the, well, I'm sacrificing this so I think that you should sacrifice that kind of mentality, or I'm doing
Yeah.
this so therefore you should do that kind of thought process, we need to get away from. And we need to we need to talk about that, address that. What does that look like? How does it express itself? And how can we reframe it to feel like we're both celebrating our wins here?
Well, one of my simple thoughts on that is, and I actually dislike the statement "agree to disagree" because I don't think it takes it to the level of depth of empathy that we need to have in those moments. but I heard it very recently said like a disagreement isn't a dispute.
Hmm.
We do not have to make an argument out of something we don't quite see the same on. A dispute is
Yeah.
something where we're arguing our points, and we feel like we have the better understanding. A disagreement is I have a point of view, and you have a point of view, and I want to be curious about you because you know what, I love you, I really love you, and now I'm curious about how you came to this point because you're more important to me than my being right.
Yeah. And I think how we do that is taking accountability. I think that we have to be open to taking accountability.
Yeah.
Even if maybe we don't agree with the reaction of the person because of our behavior, we still have to take accountability for the behavior and how it may affect people,
Mm.
and that's hard to do because, again, that ego really wants to protect itself. It really wants to preserve, and um, that's something that your partner can't help you with, or that you can't help your partner with. That's a self journey, and the accountability aspect and what you're willing to take accountability of, because it's really hard to argue with someone when you say, this behavior makes me feel this way, and they go, I don't do that. Where do we go from there? What sort of growth or what sort of conversations or understanding can be had if there's no accountability taking place to
Mhm.
that? So we just have to be open to that.
Yeah, a closed-minded response to something where I'm hurt. I'm hurt in the situation to say, "Well, I'm hurt too." And
Yeah.
that's a rejection. That's essentially a rejection of how you feel. Because my feeling is actually the important one here. Yours is not. And when we go into that pattern, if that becomes a pattern, you know that at least one of those people, and I believe it's both, of course, is their sense of trust in you is compromised and will be lost if you continue to take that approach. You're not winning. You're not when if you found a way to get through something and you feel like you got your point across and you're right and the other person's hurt, guess what? You've wronged a lot, and that relationship is not better for it. There is no extreme value in being right in that moment. It's cool to be right, if you're going to win a prize or something, but the prize of the relationship is certainly not going to be there if that's what you do. So yes, taking accountability, I think, is something that we sometimes don't really dive into after the fact. Like you said, walking away and journaling and stuff. Sometimes that accountability piece definitely comes from saying, "Man, I need to actually understand myself here. I need to be accountable to myself so then I can be also accountable to the people that I love." Because I'm not being accountable when I yell at them and when I suggest that they're wrong and I'm right. I'm not accountable to anybody. I'm actually just kind of just pushing destructive tendencies on everybody. I don't want I don't want to market myself as somebody who's there to just say you all have it wrong, I've got it right. Follow me, and we'll find the path to happiness. No, you're going to end up getting to the top of the hill and finding out that nobody wanted to climb that hill anyways. So that little lonely hill that you're standing on doesn't get you to the place where you actually intended to be.
And brother, I don't think that any of us do this intentionally. We don't
Mhm.
go into an argument thinking like, well, I want the outcome to be, I'm right and she's wrong. I rarely do I think that we ever hope for that. I think we go into an argument wanting to be solution oriented. We love this person and we do want to figure out a compromise, a way of living and understanding and maintaining homeostasis with this person, right? They're in our lives and in our space. Like, why wouldn't we? Why would we want to go into a conversation with the outcome of I'm right and you're wrong? I'm smart, you're stupid, I'm big, you're little.
Mhm.
That we don't want that, but we often just it's such a slippery slope of
Yeah.
feeling emotions and wanting to express oneself and defend oneself that before you know it, all of a sudden we are subconsciously operating in this I'm right mentality instead
Yeah.
of refocusing on the solution. So again, that's why
Mm.
I put step 6 in here, is to like figure out a way to refocus to the solution oriented part of it,
Mm.
because we have to learn what these triggers are that bring us to the mentality of I'm right or I want to defend. So again,
Mm.
if there's sometimes, just for my wife and I, it's just like a constant verbal affirmation, reaffirming, like, I'm not trying to hurt you. You know what I mean? I see that you're taking offense to this, or you may be feeling a little defensive. That's not my intent. Let me try to communicate this in a different way, or let me try saying it like this. We have a lot of that where we will pause and bring it back, reel it back a little bit, try to refocus or re-articulate or revisit that. And I think just the simplicity of that, because again, we do kind of forget, the emotion maybe spills out a little faster than we'd like, or with a little bit more tonality or passion than we were quite intended. So I think, again, it's really important to have that accountability, to bring it back and say, oh shoot, dang it, a little too loud, a little too aggressive, didn't mean to. How I didn't mean to make you feel that way. Let's try
Mm.
it in a different way.
Ooh, buddy, that I have an example that just sprung in my head that I think a lot of people end up, tripping in their relationship and getting into an argument that was maybe not intended. Maybe they had a good intention with it, but um, how many of us out there have we're in the same room as our partner, and perhaps we're making, for the first time in a certain amount of time that day, we're making an exchange, and we see them, and they look to us frustrated or upset or angry or whatever, and then we say, well, what's wrong? That's already planting in their head the idea that there's something wrong,
Yeah.
and now it needs to be addressed.
Mm.
So you mentioned like the reframing and just the ability to kind of just like speaking a language, even though we speak the same English language, we seem to trip up over the words in that language and get to somewhere we didn't intend, and it blows up on us. So what does that look like? Can we say something like, hey babe, I love you. I see this in you. I wonder if you're having these feelings. How are you doing? So just a reframing, instead of putting somebody on the stand, suggesting how much you love them and you want to check in.
Yeah, and I think it's important for both partners to, you know, be open to listening to and proposing alternatives rather than simply criticizing or rejecting or shaming, the same, or rehashing the same statements over and over again. If you see that something is offending somebody, or that, you're or taking offense to something, be maybe open with offering an alternative. The way that you said that makes me feel this way. I maybe see what you're trying to say. Could you maybe try saying it like this? Or, vice versa. I think just having the openness and accountability and willingness to do that can really go a long way, because so often couples just say thing, it gets misunderstood, and then now you're resentful at that person because they misunderstood you. When really that person misunderstood you. There's no reason for resentment, but now we're really mad at ourselves because we couldn't articulate properly. But now we're displaying even more resentment towards this other person because we didn't articulate ourselves in a good way. So again, if we can remember that spiral happens, and then it happens quick, and then it gets you into a really deep hole really fast, and we can just kind of pause and breathe and slow it down a little bit to reframe and be curious and open to presenting it in a different way, I think that we could really set ourselves up for success.
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, you're learning from your conflicts, right? There's that conflict resolution piece you're talking about. It's something that hell. I mean, it could be simply put. Somebody has had a bad day, and let's say you both had a bad day, and then you see that they've had a bad day, and you're like, well, I had the worst day, and next thing you know, you're back into it again. How do you learn from that? Like, oh well, I see that person, my love is in a certain state. I'm feeling agitated too. What do I do? What did I learn from the past that I can work through this moment?
Oh, exactly. Great transition into the last step of the exercise, JJ, which is learning growth, right? Like you say, we're not going to be perfect. We're gonna mess up. We're gonna say mistakes, and so often, man, we want our partner to be perfect. We want them to say the right thing, especially when we're in these heated moments of emotion, and we want that comfort and to feel safe and supported and understood. And when our partner doesn't give us that, our expectations are often so high that the slightest infraction, we're ready to just throw them under the bus and cut them down because we didn't get what we not needed in a moment that we really needed it. So again, going back to this piece of just self-reflection and patience, I think is really important, because you're not going to have this conversation and then you're going to stop arguing. This isn't an exercise on how to stop arguing. This is an exercise on how to argue, on how to do it in a healthy way, and in a way that creates intimacy and connection rather than distance and resentment. And I said a lot of times, this is the most important aspect of this.
Mm.
But I think that this one really is the most important piece of it. It's growth and learning. You got to be willing to learn and grow, and open to the process, and open to failing this process, and understanding and what the failure feels like and what it looks like and what kind of reactions it evokes. And through that, over and over and over again, we won't ever get perfect, but we'll get better at it, I think, every time. And we'll find a new layer to uncover and to dive deeper into, and to understand that creates even more intimacy and even more connection, and another layer of growth and understanding. So that's what I think is really cool about this, is that this isn't an ending exercise, and that this can carry you through your entire relationship and revisit it, and help you grow over and over and over again. And it doesn't ever have to stop.
Yeah, I really appreciate the idea of going back to the idea of fighting and conflict, and how this is an effort to grow and get stronger. We're not going out onto the court to win against our spouse. We're going out there to win together. And without those pieces agreed upon and understood, chances are we're going to find a lot of fouls. We're gonna recognize a lot of the flaws that we have, or that the other person has, and we're gonna focus on those rather than putting up the effort of generative inquiry, and listening and understanding and reset and pause, and coming together after breathing. Yeah, there's plenty of opportunity to suggest, especially, I want to say this just to, especially to the men, because I'm a man. You don't have to win everything in the way you think you're trying to win. Sometimes the way you think you're trying to win is actually the path to losing. Winning in the moment down the road will end up being a major loss. And I've seen it in my life. I've heard it from other people. I was watching a show called Scenes from a Marriage on HBO, where the woman says, I've been thinking about this for a long time, leaving. I've been unhappy for a long time. And the guy's like, what? Well, if you think back to all those times you won that argument, what were you losing along the way? So use these skills to argue or should I say, handle conflict with your spouse in a way that's building each other up. Because, man, it's really easy to tear down when your pride is trying to step in.
Well said, brother. Well said. Well, thanks, man, for letting me ramble about my self-created. I think I wrote this more for myself than any of our listeners or anybody else. So it's something that I wish I had in my life, in previous relationships, and that I had to help guide me. Because, man, it probably would have helped me a lot if I had gotten in touch with these things sooner. So I just kind of wanted to compile it, like I said, more for myself and anybody else that finds value in it. So if you'd like access to what we talked about here today and this exercise on how to establish rules of engagement with you and your spouse, please head over to our homepage at the ADHDads.com, and you can sign up for our email list there, and we'll get you all the information that you need with this exercise. And if you're also interested, coaching services with JJ and I, where we'll kind of help you run through some intentionality with your kids and your wife, and teach you some leadership skills and just how to have a more intentional and successful life and personal life and relationships all around you. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you got something out of today, and I'm looking forward to having you, in or having us in your speakers the next time. So thank you very much. My name is CJ.
I'm JJ.
And this has been the ADH Dads.